It's totally fine. I have a lot more stories.
That you do.
Yeah.
That you do.
Guilty as charged with the stories.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to I've Got Something to Say. Thanks so much for tuning in, streaming, or downloading this podcast. This is where I tell you stories about me, and you listen to stories about me. This week's episode is titled The Miracle Worker. A couple of weeks ago, actually last week, although when you're listening to this, it could be at any time, because that's part of the beauty of podcasting. You get to listen to it when it's convenient for you. But last week, in this particular timeline that I'm living in right now while we record this, we had what we called a day of learning at Sprint. And I'm just going to lay this out and be honest here. Currently, in my day job at Sprint, we're very busy not only with business as usual, or BAU activities, as I like to call them, but also you may have seen in the news that Sprint and T-Mobile are trying to effect a merger together, which in actuality, I think, is T-Mobile buying Sprint, but it's two companies coming together. And we, as of the recording of this, we have no idea how it's going to come out. Every other day, the news either seems positive or negative. So there's a lot of busyness for people that are involved in integration planning, which I happen to be involved in. So I'm doing my BAU, you might remember I just said that's business as usual job. And then I'm also got another half-time job, we'll say, doing integration planning. So I'm very busy is what I'm getting at. Anybody that knows me well knows that that's not the norm for me to be real busy with my career. So this has really taken a lot of my time and a lot of energy. And it's cool, and I hope the companies come together and we make something great together. But in the meantime, it doesn't leave a lot of time for anything else at work other than just doing work. So, back to the day of learning that I mentioned earlier. When it was decided that we would offer this day of learning, I thought, wow, do we really want to do this right now? We've got so much going on. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to throw a lot more onto the plates of a lot of people to do a big production. I was concerned. I kept those concerns to myself because I wanted to be a team player. And let me just say, I was wrong. It turned out to be an amazing day. And what it was we brought in 5 guest speakers, motivational speakers, if you will. Each one had 45 minutes to deliver a topic. And then afterwards, we recorded them and did a little podcast for some supplemental material. Invited people to attend in person on the Sprint campus, but then also all of our partners all over the world, we invited them to attend. Had some amazing guest speakers. Sarah Ross kicked the day off. She was incredible. She's a Canadian, so she has a funny accent. And then this woman named Stacy Flowers was also exceptional. We had a local lady as well, and oh my gosh, her name escapes me, but she was really good. Ended the day with a guy named Mitch Holthus, who is the voice of the Kansas City Chiefs, does their radio broadcast. Such a cool day. I got a lot of insights and things that I pulled and I remembered, and I'm going to give, this is a freebie tip for everybody. Sarah Ross told us that studies have proven when you send an email, the recipient always reads it as one notch more negative than the intent with which it was sent. So the practical application is, if you want to let somebody know that you're annoyed in an email, maybe don't go full on pissed off in the email that you write to them, because they're going to read it as even more negative than the intent with which you send it. So if you send something with absolutely no emotion or tone in it, strictly communicating, people will tend to think, oh gosh, this is kind of negative. So that's just something to keep in mind. I'm not telling you to litter your emails with emojis and superlatives and happy wishes or things like that, but it's a good takeaway to be conscious of. And it made me think, there was a time in my life, and the desire may still be there, where I really wanted to be a motivational speaker. I like getting up in front of people. Does it scare me? Of course it does. I get nervous every time I'm up in front of a group of people, but I really enjoy it. And I think back to all these different occasions where I've done public speaking. I've done a number of sermons in the church and have always enjoyed that. Stand-up comedy. I've done that with my buddy Paul, and we've had a great time with that. I think back, I've mentioned my dead friend Mike more than once on this podcast, and I think back to his funeral at 19, 20 years old. Paul and I were both asked to speak about Mike and talk about our friendship. So at that young age, getting up in front of a group of people and talking was scary but cathartic, and I really enjoyed it. So I was basking in the day of learning, just soaking up all these nuggets, looking at the people on stage, thinking, could I do that? Would I like to do that? I think the answers are yes to both. But I also realize that not all of my speeches or addresses to groups were big successes. Some of them may not have been received in the tone in which they were intended when they were delivered. And one such instance I remember, I was running for student council, the executive committee on student council. The specific office that I was pursuing was the Student and Community Concerns chairperson. And I believe this was the end of sophomore year going into junior year. And so I was up on the stage. My friend Paul was up there with me too. He was running for student council, and everybody that was up there, was a bunch of us, were giving speeches for their particular race. Now, I was in a unique position in that I was not running against anyone. I was unopposed, which is how I like to run my races. I'm all about competition where I'm guaranteed to win. So I really felt like the pressure was off. A little bit about this position. This is the position that would do things like the blood drive, the United Way campaign. So these are the outreach things, the philanthropic things that the student council would do, if you will. So this is, somebody that's maybe kind of a bleeding heart, very empathetic, cares about other people, typically would be accepting of all, probably not going out and making fun of people. That's the type of person you want in this role of Student and Community Concerns chairperson. Well, I didn't have to run against anybody, so I didn't know why I needed to put a lot of effort into convincing people that I could be empathetic and caring and kind and accepting. So I just decided I was going to have fun with this speech. And I don't remember the entire speech, but I do very vividly and specifically remember how I started this speech off. And it was kind of fun. So first of all, picture in your mind, we're up on the stage in a school auditorium. Anybody who's ever been in a high school auditorium, just picture that in your mind. There's a podium in the middle of the stage that each of us were to speak at. And then on either side of the podium were chairs lined up with all of these people that were going to speak. So imagine podium. Immediately to the left of the podium is one person. On the other side of that person is me. I believe that person was Paul, who's in this very room with me. And then on my left was 4 or 5 other people, and then there was an entire row in front of us as well. So there were a lot of people on stage. So what would have made sense is for me to stand up, excuse myself in front of one person, Paul, and walk to the podium. That's all I needed to do. Instead, I got up, went to my left in front of 5, 6, 7 other people, making everybody have to move and scramble, feel uncomfortable. Chairs are shifting. It's like I'm walking toward the exit door. But then when I got to the very end of my row, I stepped up to the row in front of us and walked in front of everybody there to go up to the podium. So it was ridiculous. I made a spectacle out of the whole thing and was not showing a lot of respect for the process, for what we were doing, and for the people in the audience that I was asking to trust me with their philanthropic efforts. So I get up to the podium and I get ready. When you speak, man, you want to grab people from the beginning. You want something that's going to get their attention, something that relates to what you're going to talk about, and something that draws them in immediately. So I'm standing there looking out over the packed auditorium. This is my chance to sell people that I, even though I'm unopposed, am going to be a spectacular student and community concerns chairman. And I kick off my speech with something that, let me just say, preface with this, I would never say this today. This was 1984. I'm young. I'm dumb. Not really woke at that point in my life. And so I survey the crowd. I look, let the applause die down, and say, "Hi, everyone. You know, Helen Keller once said," and that's why I think I'm your best choice for Student and Community Concerns Chairman. Much to the detriment, or maybe I get not to the detriment. It just doesn't speak well for the crowd that they erupted into laughter at that. I should have been shamed and run out of that auditorium and not allowed to have any leadership position on student council. Instead, I just fed off the laughter of all the students, and I looked down, and in the front row is Mrs. Ziegenhorn, the sponsor of the student council, and she has her head down in her hand, just shaking her head back and forth as if to say, "Really? What the hell, Whiting?" She was so dismayed and disturbed by the whole thing. And what's even sadder is at the time I looked at her and thought, what gives? That's a great line. How are you not into this? Oh my gosh. So that's one of those things that I look back and I snicker and I cringe all at the same time. And those of you who are frequent listeners to this podcast will know that my life is littered with examples of things that make me snicker and cringe. Well, that does it for this edition of I've Got Something to Say. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, for listening, for downloading, for streaming. However you digest this podcast or ingest this podcast, I appreciate it. Certainly want to thank Paul and the good folks at KCTK Radio for producing this podcast, making it a reality so that your ears can listen to the words that I say. We'll talk to you next time.